Welcome back, my friends. Today, we are going to explore one of the greatest turning points in human history. It is a story that did not begin with a famous king, a great battle, or the fall of an empire. Instead, it began with ordinary people, ordinary work, and a few simple ideas that slowly grew into something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. More than 250 years ago, life was very different from the world we know today. Most people lived in small villages, worked on farms, or learned a skill from their parents. A blacksmith spent the entire day making a few tools. A weaver needed many hours to produce a single piece of cloth. A carpenter carefully shaped every piece of wood by hand. Everything took time, patience, and hard work. And for generations, very little seemed to change. Children often grew up living the same kind of life as their parents, and many believed that this was simply how the world would always be. Then, little by little, something began to change. A few inventors started asking simple questions. Could work be done faster? Could machines help people produce more? Could one new idea save hours of human effort at first? These inventions seemed small, and few people paid much attention to them. But each new machine inspired another. Each new discovery opened the door to something greater. And before long, workshops became factories. Quiet towns became busy cities, and a way of life that had existed for centuries began to disappear. No one living at that time knew they were witnessing the beginning of a revolution. There were no celebrations, no speeches, and no single moment when people realized history had changed. Yet within only a few generations, the world looked completely different. Steam engines powered industries. Railways connected distant cities. Factories produced goods on a scale never seen before. And millions of people left the countryside to build new lives in growing industrial towns. Historians would later give this extraordinary period a simple name: the Industrial Revolution. But this is not only the story of machines, it is the story of people, of families, of workers, of inventors, and of a society that was transformed forever. It is the story of how a few remarkable ideas changed the way humanity worked, traveled, traded, and lived, creating the foundations of the modern world we know today. So, how did it all begin? Why did this revolution start in Britain? And how did a handful of inventions change the lives of billions of people? To answer those questions, we must go back to the very beginning. Long before factories covered the landscape, Britain was still a country of farms, small villages, and local workshops. Every morning, farmers walked into the fields before sunrise, hoping for good weather and a successful harvest. In the villages, blacksmiths worked beside hot fires. Weavers sat quietly at their wooden looms, and carpenters carefully shaped each piece of wood by hand. Almost everything people owned had been made by someone they knew. It took time, patience, and skill, and for most families, life changed very little from one generation to the next. As the years passed, however, Britain began to grow. The population increased, towns became larger, and more people needed food, clothing, tools, and homes. Merchants wanted to sell more goods, but making everything by hand was simply too slow. A weaver could only produce a limited amount of cloth in one day. A blacksmith could only make so many tools before nightfall. No matter how hard people worked, there was always a limit to what human hands could produce. At the same time, Britain had several important advantages. Rich deposits of coal lay beneath the ground, providing a powerful source of energy. Rivers connected towns and cities, making it easier to move goods from one place to another. Busy ports welcomed ships from across Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas, bringing new ideas, valuable materials, and growing trade. The country was becoming wealthier, but its traditional way of working could no longer keep up with the increasing demand. This was the moment when curious minds began searching for better solutions. Inventors, engineers, and skilled craftsmen were not trying to change history. Most of them simply wanted to solve everyday problems. They asked simple questions. Could a machine do this job faster? Could one invention save hours of hard work? Could a new engine replace the strength of people or horses? Each answer led to another question, and each new idea inspired someone else to improve it. At first, these inventions attracted little attention. A new spinning machine in one workshop or a better engine in a coal mine did not seem important enough to change the future. Yet those small improvements slowly connected together. Workshops expanded into factories. Production increased year after year. More workers moved into growing towns, and new opportunities appeared where quiet fields had once stretched across the countryside. Without realizing it, Britain had taken the first steps into a completely new age. It did not happen in a single year, and no one could point to one exact day when the old world disappeared. Instead, change arrived little by little, until one day people looked around and discovered that almost everything had become different. The Industrial Revolution had begun, and its influence would soon spread far beyond Britain, reaching every corner of the world. One of the first industries to feel this change was the textile industry. Cloth was something every family needed, but making it was slow and difficult. Before machines, workers spun thread by hand and wove cloth on simple wooden looms. A single piece of fabric could take many hours, or even days, to complete. As Britain's population continued to grow, the demand for clothing increased faster than ever before. People needed a better way to produce more cloth in less time. During the 18th century, several inventors introduced machines that completely changed the process. The spinning jenny allowed one worker to spin several threads at the same time. Soon after, the water frame used the power of flowing rivers to produce even stronger thread. Then came the power loom, which transformed weaving from slow manual work into a much faster mechanical process. One invention inspired another, and each new machine made the previous one seem outdated. These machines were too large and too expensive for most families to keep inside their homes. Instead, business owners gathered them together in large buildings where many workers could use them at the same time. These buildings became the first modern factories. Inside them, dozens, and later, hundreds of people worked under one roof. The sound of spinning wheels, moving gears, and heavy machines filled the air from early morning until late at night. For many people, it was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Factories quickly changed the way people lived. Instead of working from home or in small workshops, thousands of workers moved into growing industrial towns. New houses appeared almost overnight. Shops, schools, and markets followed the expanding population. Cities such as Manchester and Birmingham grew at an incredible speed, becoming symbols of Britain's new industrial age. For some families, factory work offered opportunities they had never had before. Regular wages allowed people to earn money throughout the year, instead of depending only on the harvest. But life inside the factories was far from easy. The working day often lasted 12 to 14 hours. The machines were loud, dangerous, and unforgiving. Safety rules were almost non-existent, and accidents happened far too often. Even young children worked beside adults, performing difficult and sometimes hazardous tasks because their small hands could reach places that adults could not. Yet despite these hardships, factories continued to spread across Britain. Production increased every year. Goods became cheaper and more available than ever before. Ordinary families, who could never have afforded certain products in the past, slowly found them becoming part of everyday life. The Industrial Revolution was no longer a series of new inventions. It had become a powerful force that was transforming society itself, changing where people lived, how they worked, and how they imagined the future. As factories became more productive, another challenge quickly appeared. Producing goods was no longer the biggest problem. Moving those goods across the country was. Roads were often rough and muddy, making long journeys slow and expensive. Horses could only carry limited amounts of cargo, and rivers did not connect every town. If Britain wanted its new factories to keep growing, it needed a faster way to transport both raw materials and finished products. The answer came from one of the most important inventions of the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine. Earlier versions of steam engines had already been used to pump water out of deep coal mines, but they were large, inefficient, and expensive to operate. Everything changed when Scottish engineer James Watt improved the design in the late 18th century. His new steam engine was far more reliable and used much less fuel. Suddenly, steam power could be used in factories, mills, and many other industries. Before long, engineers began asking an even bigger question. If steam engines could power machines inside factories, could they also move vehicles? The answer was yes. During the early 19th century, steam-powered locomotives appeared on newly built railway lines. For the first time in history, people and goods could travel across long distances, much faster than horses and wagons had ever allowed. Journeys that once took several days could now be completed in only a few hours. The railway changed everyday life, almost immediately. Farmers could send fresh food to distant cities before it spoiled. Factory owners could receive coal, iron, and cotton more quickly than ever before. Merchants expanded their businesses into places they had never reached before. Ordinary people also discovered that traveling was becoming easier and more affordable. Many visited other cities for the first time in their lives, and new opportunities opened wherever the railways reached. Steam power did not stop on land. Ships also began replacing sails with powerful steam engines. Unlike sailing ships, steamships were not completely dependent on the wind. They could travel more reliably, carry larger amounts of cargo, and follow more predictable schedules. International trade expanded rapidly, connecting Britain with markets across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. The world was becoming more connected than ever before. These changes transformed Britain's economy. Factories produced more goods, railways delivered them faster, and steamships carried them around the world. Businesses grew larger, cities expanded, and millions of people found new kinds of work. The Industrial Revolution was no longer changing only Britain. It was beginning to reshape the global economy, creating a new age of industry, trade, and innovation that would influence every generation that followed. The Industrial Revolution brought extraordinary progress, but it also created problems that many people had never faced before. As factories continued to grow, thousands of families left quiet villages and moved into rapidly expanding cities. They believed they would find better jobs and build better lives. For some, that dream became reality. For many others, Life became more difficult than they had expected. Industrial cities grew faster than anyone could plan for. Rows of small houses were built close together to make room for the growing population. Entire families often lived in a single room. Clean water was limited. Waste filled the streets, and diseases spread quickly through crowded neighborhoods. The smoke rising from factory chimneys covered many cities with thick clouds that darkened the sky. People had never seen places grow so quickly, and few understood how to deal with the problems that came with such rapid change. Working conditions inside the factories were often harsh. A normal working day could last 12, sometimes even 14 hours. Workers stood beside large machines from morning until night, with very few breaks. The noise was constant. The air was filled with dust, and accidents were common. There were no modern safety rules, no protective equipment, and very little support for those who were injured. If someone became too sick to work, they often lost both their job and their income. Children were also part of this new industrial world. Many poor families depended on every member of the household to earn money. Boys and girls worked in textile mills, coal mines, and factories. Sometimes beginning at only 8 or 9 years old, they carried heavy loads, cleaned dangerous machinery, and spent long hours doing exhausting work. Today, it is difficult to imagine children working in such conditions. But during the early years of the Industrial Revolution, it was a common part of everyday life. As these problems became impossible to ignore, people slowly began demanding change. Journalists wrote about unsafe factories. Doctors warned about unhealthy living conditions. Religious leaders, politicians, and ordinary citizens called for better treatment of workers. Over time, governments introduced new laws that limited working hours, improved factory safety, and reduced child labor. These reforms did not happen overnight, but they marked the beginning of a new understanding that economic progress should also protect human lives. The Industrial Revolution was never a simple story of success or failure. It brought wealth, innovation, and opportunity, but it also revealed the cost of rapid change. It showed the world that every great invention can improve lives. Yet every new era also brings challenges that society must learn to overcome. Those lessons remain just as important today as they were more than 200 years ago. Although the Industrial Revolution began in Britain, it did not remain there for long. Other countries watched Britain's success with great interest. They saw factories producing goods faster than ever before, railways connecting cities, and businesses growing rapidly. Soon, nations across Europe wanted to build their own industries. Before long, the Industrial Revolution spread to France, Germany, Belgium, and later to the United States, where it would reshape an entire continent. Each country adapted the new ideas in its own way. New factories appeared. Railways stretched across thousands of miles, and cities expanded at an incredible speed. Industries such as steel, coal, and engineering grew stronger every year. Competition between nations became more intense, as governments realized that industrial power often meant military strength and economic influence. Countries that embraced new technology became wealthier, while those that failed to modernize struggled to keep pace. The Industrial Revolution also transformed communication. During the 19th century, Samuel Morse introduced the electric telegraph, allowing messages to travel across great distances in just minutes instead of days. For the first time in history, governments, businesses, and families could exchange important information almost instantly. The world suddenly felt much smaller, and international trade became faster and more organized than ever before. New inventions continued to appear one after another. Alexander Graham Bell introduced the telephone, making it possible for people to speak across long distances. Thomas Edison developed practical electric lighting, changing the way people worked and lived after sunset. Factories no longer depended entirely on daylight, and cities became brighter as electric lights replaced candles and oil lamps. Innovation seemed unstoppable, with each generation creating technologies that previous generations could hardly imagine. Education also became more important. Factories needed engineers, managers, accountants, and skilled workers who could read instructions, operate complex machinery, and solve technical problems. Many governments invested more in schools, believing that education would help their countries remain competitive in this new industrial age. Knowledge became one of the most valuable resources a nation could possess. By the end of the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution had changed far more than manufacturing. It had transformed transportation, communication, education, science, business, and everyday life. The world had become more connected than ever before. People could travel farther, communicate faster, and produce more goods than any previous generation. The foundations of the modern global economy were now firmly in place, preparing humanity for the incredible technological advances that the 20th century would soon bring. Today, it is almost impossible to imagine a world without the changes brought by the Industrial Revolution. Every time a train carries passengers across a country, every time a factory produces thousands of products in a single day, and every time goods travel across oceans to reach another continent, we are seeing the legacy of a revolution that began more than 2 centuries ago. The Industrial Revolution did more than introduce new machines. It changed the way people thought about work, innovation, and the future. It encouraged inventors to keep improving old ideas, inspired businesses to grow beyond their local communities, and connected countries through trade on a scale that had never existed before. It also proved that a single invention could create opportunities far beyond what its creator had ever imagined. Of course, history reminds us that progress always comes with responsibility. The first factories taught the world important lessons about workers' rights, education, public health, and the need for safer working conditions. Those lessons helped shape many of the labor laws and social protections that exist today. The Industrial Revolution was not perfect, but it forced societies to find a better balance between economic growth and human well-being. Many historians believe that we are living through another great transformation today. Artificial intelligence, robotics, renewable energy, and digital technology are changing our lives almost as quickly as steam engines and factories changed the lives of people in the 18th century. Just like those who lived during the Industrial Revolution, we cannot fully predict what the future will look like. We only know that the decisions we make today may shape the lives of future generations. When we look back at the Industrial Revolution, we are not simply studying old factories or steam engines. We are studying the moment when humanity entered the modern age. It was the beginning of faster travel, larger cities, global trade, mass production, and technological innovation. Many of the comforts we enjoy today can trace their origins to that remarkable period in history. The story of the Industrial Revolution reminds us that history is not only made by kings, generals, or famous leaders. Sometimes, history changes because ordinary people refuse to stop asking questions. They keep searching for better ideas, better tools, and better ways to solve everyday problems. Those small ideas, repeated again and again, can eventually transform the entire world Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of history's greatest turning points. I hope this story has helped you improve your English while discovering how the Industrial Revolution changed the world forever. If you enjoyed learning through history, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join me again for another story from the past that continues to shape our lives today.